Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. The African National Congress's Integrity Commission is set to deliver a report on President Cyril Ramaphosa, over the Phala Phala robbery. The report will be presented at the party's National Executive Committee meeting in Nasrec today. It comes just days after the president took the Section 89 panel report on judicial review. For more on this, we're joined by Asanda Ngoasheng, who is a political analyst. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. Now, outstanding reports from the ANC NEC's Integrity Committee are expected. We know that attempts to deal with the Phala Phala report at last month's ordinary sitting of the NEC failed after it was leaked to the public. But since then, a lot has happened. What do you imagine to be some of the challenges that the president will be facing?
Well, I think it's a very interesting situation that the ANC is in, wherein they're supposed to be discussing the Phala Phala report, but they're also supposed to be discussing the digital natives report at the same time, meaning that the top two candidates for ANC presidency and therefore potentially South Africa's next president are both sitting and being discussed because of some questions around corruption and around some of the actions which are seen to be dodgy.
And we know that, of course, Ramaphosa, with him not being the only leader with the outstanding matter, I mean, what do you imagine these findings will mean, looking at his main opponent, Zweli Mkhize, and what that will essentially do in setting the tone ahead of conference?
I think that Ramaphosa probably has a lot to answer for, and as South Africans we should be calling for that level of accountability. But I think the timing of the independent panel, considering we've known about Phala Phala for a while, the timing of its release is actually very curious. And it does seem to me to be part of the plot to make sure that by the time we get to the national conference, that Cyril Ramaphosa is almost as tainted as his candidate, as his kind of competitor, who also is facing his own charges around the digital natives corruption. And so essentially what's happening is that each camp is having an ideological war wherein they're trying to show that their candidate is just as bad or just as good as the next one, which isn't a good place for South Africans to be in, because we would like to be led by people who are above reproach and people who are not currently facing corruption. Because whether Cyril Ramaphosa wins or Zweli Mkhize wins, ultimately what's likely to happen is that we're going to have a sitting president who's going to be going through an appeal process, which we've already had with Jacob Zuma having been in the presidency and constantly fighting various charges that he was facing. And this is not a good situation for, what is potentially going to be the president of the country. Hence, I'm saying this is one of those situations where the ANC is doing what is best for it and what is in its interest. But is what the ANC doing really in the best interest of South Africa? I don't think so, because we deserve a democratic, a clean government and a democratic process and dispensation, wherein South Africans right now are being held hostage by, a million members of the ANC, 66 million people held hostage, in the sense that everything that's happening in the ANC is having a direct impact and a negative impact on brand South Africa. Already, our currency has responded to Phala Phala and the various ongoings, and we as South Africans are the ones who end up suffering at the end of the day for decisions and things that we actually have very little to do with. If you're not a member of the ANC and you're not participating in the voting that's happening, you have very little control, and yet these things are having a major impact on us.
Well, with that in mind, what does that essentially speak to when it comes to the battle lines that have been drawn within the factions, the opposing factions, and the impact of factions at play within the ANC?
Well, the factions have basically ensured that South Africans are the last thing on the ANC's mind. The ANC is interested in what is good for its own interests and is interested in ensuring that its own lines of patronage continue to be lined. And the biggest loser in this, of course, is the South African voter and the South African citizen, who hasn't been able to get much by way of service delivery because of the corruption that ANC leaders have been involved in. If you listen to state capture and if you listen to kind of the news every other day, there's yet another member who's being charged with corruption or is being accused of being corrupt. And this doesn't bode well for South Africa as a country in terms of its brand, for its economy, and for our ability as South Africans to be able to live in a country where we can trust that the government will deliver the services that it promises us. I speak to you right now from a Cape Town that has load shedding, and I've had to make a plan to get my lighting right because I live in a country where we can't even rely on a consistent supply of electricity when we are a country that has enough coal, that has enough sun, that has enough many multiple options that can make sure that our energy production is at the level that it is. But we sit in a country that has corruption, and if you listen to what the kind of levels of corruption was happening at Eskom, in terms of what the Zondo Commission was telling us about the levels of state capture, we can directly point a line to the ANC and the ANC's failings for the ailments that we as a country are experiencing. And that is the biggest problem that I have, that we have come to a point where the governing party, that is the ANC, is constantly dishing out negative outcomes for South Africans because they are positive outcomes for them, as long as they have access to power, as long as they have access to, the patronage lines. It doesn't matter what South Africans need, what South Africans think, and what is in the best interest for South Africa. If you look at the fact that we have a political party that sees nothing wrong with fielding two candidates who need to have reports discussed about them. Is the ANC really out of people who have no scandals and no accusations? Look at the 200 people. I can list, a variety of scandals and corruption allegations against probably almost all of them. And that's not a good thing. They tell us that, they've brought in young people. And what are they talking about? They're talking about Malusi Kigaba. They're talking about, Duduzi Manala, somebody who was accused of GBV, somebody who was accused of corruption. And these are the people that are supposed to represent us. And what breaks my heart is that we are a country that has some of the most intelligent, some of the most creative, and some of the most amazing people in the world. We are world renowned for various things and are well sought after. But we can't find those people who are the best at what they do in the party that is in charge of this country. And it's quite an irony when you look at who is the top 200 and you ask yourself, are these the top 200 South Africans? Is this the best that we can deliver as a country? And the answer is no.
Yeah, and there's also been some talk around perhaps now being a time to look even broader when it comes to leadership outside of political dynamics to find the right and suitable candidates. Now, as you speak about the list of names, we know that former ANC Women's League President Bathabile Dlamini has described the decision by the ANC's Electoral Committee to disqualify her from being eligible to stand as an NEC member as shocking. She says it's shocking, but is it a surprise?
This is exactly what I'm talking about. That we have a political party that has people who think that it's shocking that they are not fit to lead when they have been charged and actually, been sentenced for crimes, whether it's corruption or perjury or whatever it is. You've got Lungile, you've got Andile Lungisa as well, who's also on that list of 200, who potentially also got his own letter. I'm sure over the next coming days we'll be hearing from him. He assaulted a fellow MP and so on. That's why I'm saying when we go through this list of 200, we literally have a story for each and every single individual, which is an unsavory story. And that is where this is sad. And that ANC people are so entitled and so used to South Africans or the ANC, I suppose, ignoring their crimes, ignoring their wrongdoings, that she is shocked that she didn't make the cut and is not eligible for leadership. I think part of the conversation we need to be having is, what is leadership? And how does the current ANC understand leadership? And what is the criteria for leadership? And is it compatible with what we as South Africans think is leadership and what we as South Africans think the criteria for leadership is. Because if you don't do that, then we are essentially going to go into a phase, and we've already seen it, where the social contract is broken, where people are now, we've seen people already taking the law into their own hands because they can't trust the police to do the job, where people are basically doing the job that government is supposed to be doing because we can't trust our government. We can't trust our leaders to do what they're supposed to do. We can't trust our leaders to be ethical and to consider the ethics of every single decision that they make, such that we're not sitting here having these conversations and people are not using lawyers to argue things that if they were ethical and morally upstanding citizens, they wouldn't even dare to face the potential humiliation of trying to challenge the possibility of being put in leadership again when they have failed us as a country so dismally.
Very well. Thank you so much. Thanks for weighing in. Asanda Ngoasheng, political analyst, speaking, of course, ahead of that special sitting that's set to take place.